Hello, hello out there. Welcome. My name is Michaela, and on behalf of Sankofa Bookstore and Sankofa TV, I want to welcome you to today's program, which is Kicking Against Holy Houses and in conversation with Bomani Armah and Dr. Natasha Gordon-Chipembere for her book, Finding La Negrita, which can be purchased at our store, our brick and mortar, located at 2714 Georgia Avenue Northwest, or online at sankofa.com. So, like I said, we're very happy to have you, and we're very happy to have our speaker today. Before we get started with that, I want to tell you a little bit about Sankofa. We are a bookstore that's been peddling Pan-African books and events since 1998. This is our 25th year anniversary, and it's also the 30th anniversary of Sankofa, the movie. So if you haven't seen it, that film is actually available on Netflix right now. Without further ado, I'm going to actually introduce our panelists and our speakers today. First being Dr. Natasha Gordon-Chipembere. Dr. Natasha Gordon-Chipembere has been a professor of African diasporic literature for over 20 years. She's taught in classrooms from South Africa to New York to Costa Rica. Her academic scholarship focuses on slavery, and her first book project, Representation and Black Womanhood, The Legacy of Sarah Bartman, is now required reading for all first-year college students in South Africa. Gordon-Chipembere's writing has also been published in Essence magazine, along with the monthly Times. She will be in conversation with Bomani Armah. Bomani Armah is a family man, hip-hop artist, rapper, poet, songwriter, producer, performer, and educator, and you guys need to check out Watermelon Day coming up soon. You'll hear an announcement about that. Bomani is best known for his 2007 viral BET video, Read a Book. In 2015, Baba Bomani debuted his Bomani Armah writing system, aka Bars, and since then, Bomani has taught the writing process through hip-hop to over 80,000 teachers and students. As the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts teaching artist, Bomani does concerts, professional development, assemblies, residencies under his art-integrated teaching artist alter ego, Baba Bomani. In 2021, he released his third album, this time under his favorite alter ego, entitled Bomani Armah is the Watermelon Man. Find out more about Bomani Armah at notarapper.com. Without further ado, I'm going to bring on Dr. Natasha Gordon-Chipembere and Bomani Armah. Give it up, give it up. Woo!
Hello,
Thank
everybody.
you so much for being here.
Hello.
Go ahead and disappear now.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Michaela. Good. Is it morning? Oh, it's afternoon. It's a quick day.
It's afternoon. Yes.
Dr. Natasha Gordon-Chipembere, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And please call me Natasha.
Got you, Natasha. All right. Now, let me make one quick commercial announcement, and then I want to get into you reading a chapter from your book.
Yes.
So as Michaela has said, Sankofa Video and Books, which I overheard someone last year calling Sankofa the Pan-African Embassy. I think I'm gonna go with that from now on. Yeah, if you want to have a good conversation about Africa, just go have a coffee in Sankofa and it will happen. But we are coming up on our 16th year of doing Watermelon Day. We are exactly 90 days, 22 hours, and 52 minutes away from Watermelon Day 2023. That's going to happen on August 5th at 3 p.m. When you see Baba C and tell the kids to do the drum call, you'll know we're started right there on Georgia Avenue. I've been doing this event and funding the event for the last 15 years. I'm finally doing a fundraiser for it. My good friends at Terrell Arts, that's Zudeka and James Terrell, have created this multimedia Watermelon Day 2023 t-shirt. I literally just got this in the mail like 2 hours ago, which is absolutely perfect timing. If you want to plant a seed into Watermelon Day, and if you don't know what Watermelon Day is, every year, the first Saturday in August, we get I get 50 watermelons, and I hire 6 teaching artists to do an outdoor block party, and I just hand out slices of watermelon all day. If you want to get full off watermelon, just come down Georgia Avenue, and we celebrate everything red, black, and green. All right. If you didn't know where the stereotype comes from that Black people love watermelon, it comes from the historically documented fact that Black people love watermelon. And I am really into Black people being comfortable in their own skin. So come down to Sankofa and fill up on some red, black, and green. And make sure you go to my website. We'll give you more information so you can get the Watermelon Day t-shirt. It's a little overpriced, but that's because it's a fundraiser. We want you to let people know that you're supporting this movement and us, pushing more RBG energy. All right. So now let's get into this. I will be honest with you. I've been reading less than I normally do, and that's a lot to say from Mr. Read a Book. And I definitely don't read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of more history than fiction. Finding the La Negrita is the book I needed to read right now. So I want to thank you for writing it. I want to thank Lisa for bringing it to my attention. And I want you to pick a section of the book to read from, and then we'll kick off the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm really happy that Finding La Negrita brought you back to fiction. Very nice.
Yes.
Okay, so I am going to read a section right at the beginning of the book called Esmeralda. And please understand that this book is set in 1634 colonial Cartago, Costa Rica, in Central America. My name is Esmeralda. It is only at this time in the morning, when the first birds are remembering the sounds of their voices, calling to the sun to warm their wings after a night of nestle perching, that I can stand outside. I am 51 years old as far as I've been able to count, which I learned only after being given to the church. I've always been owned by one form of oppression or another. As an enslaved person, my life is one of interiors. I cleaned the church for Padre, and I lived tucked away in a shack behind the looming gravity of stained glass and burnt candle stubs. Today, I stand in my doorway, edged slightly against the frame, so if anyone were to pass, they would have to look twice to see me. Instead of staring up into the fleeing night sky and seeing the shadow of volcano Irasu, I look down at my shriveled left arm, hanging aimlessly against my thin green dress, its color lost years ago with constant washing. It is hard to see the width of this place around me, as my left eye remains glassy and visionless. I do not think back to the fire, but shrug off those memories that want to take over. I have been in this place, Costa Rica, for my entire life, but came here to Cartago at the age of 16 when my mother and brother died and I was gifted to the church. 35 years have passed and I serve as witness, now with one eye, to the comings and goings of this very different place. I do not remember the land beyond the sea that many speak about in La Cotera, and I force myself not to take on their longing. Guatemala is the center of the universe in this place of mountains and volcanoes and trees thick with arms that stretch into the nocturnal homes of hundreds of birds. The air is chill this morning. Padre has yet to stir, though at times I have been called to light candles in the small chapel alongside the altar this early in the morning, when he has woken from a restless sleep and prayer is possibly his medicine. I do not know and I do not care about the things that move his world. I only care when his world collides with mine. Today I think about this town that feels forgotten from the rest of the world. The labor of my enslaved brothers and sisters is shared alongside their owners in the cacao farms and cattle ranching to provide the meat which is cooked by enslaved hands at the table of the pañas in town. I hear them discussing how without a cash plantation crop, they are unable to compete with the silver mines or sugarcane plantations of Brazil. Our numbers are relatively small, and that is why several have been able to hire themselves out and, over time, eventually buy their freedom. I have seen Dakarai do it. He's 7 years old and working for all those extra Sundays where he saved every real until he could remove the bitterness of slavery from his tongue and become reunited with his daughter, Jendai. Some, like myself, do not have the fortune of skills that they can manipulate towards freedom. I am a slave of the church, and I know this is how I will die. With my one working eye and arm, it is much more difficult to do the work of cleaning. Yet Jendai delivers water to the church before attending school here with the other children who are free blacks under Padre's guidance. Costa Rica is nestled between two wide oceans, I am told. It does not offer much, and so we are poor and huddled in the confines of the Orosi Valley, pretending that the Spaniards here are not forced to labor among their enslaved workers in order to pay the taxes to the grand audience in Guatemala. The details are hard to work out, but I know there is not enough money to create certain distances between those who are free and owned. And fast forward a little bit. I waited an extra hour for her this morning. Jendai cannot see me, but I can smell her youth, even after she has put the water down, making prints in the soft, slushy mud that has been made from the water she spills. I only see out of one eye, so the world is concentrated in the other senses of my body. Creaks fill my ears as I straighten from the small kerosene stove, which I have warmed my café con leche on. This is my only weakness, as I do not always have access to milk. Normally, my coffee is rumbling brown and steaming hot. Yesterday, however, Doña Elena came to the church to arrange for the baptism of her grandson with Padre, and she brought offerings of milk and sugar. When Padre came out to my small shack, I thought he was coming for other things, things that go unsaid. Even in this old age, I do not have the freedom of my body. But Padre cleared his throat and handed me a tin cup filled with fresh milk through the partially open crack in my door. As soon as he turned his back to go inside the church, I touched the cups to my lip and drank a sip. Instantly, I was taken back to the time when my brother Enrique would milk the cows at the hacienda and bring some of it back to our mother. This is when I did not know the formal bounds of slavery. I was a child. Yet I was smart enough to notice that my mother's back was like a crescent moon. She hardly looked up from her work, and I had few memories of Mama ever looking at my face. I was left to play on my own and then eventually work on the hacienda until Don Dominguez gave me to the church. I have seen 3 different padres run this church, but this one is like the other bad one who killed his brother in their sacred place, blood spilt on the altar where his spirit continues to moan at night, will witness to my sleeplessness. However, this one is really the worst. He is young, perhaps 40, but already he has a stout body from all the rich foods he finds at the table of hospitable Spanish families. His straight brown hair often covers the meanness in his dark, narrow-set eyes. There is no kindness in him, though he pretends to be respectful to the wealthier patrons of the church to ensure his place at their Sunday dinner table. Though I could be his mother, he expects things from me that no son should want. I think it is this church that makes his blood tainted. There is only death and sadness here since the killing brothers. I've heard the tales, whispers about the wandering soul whose voice I too have heard lamenting as I clean the floors of the nave. I never fear him since his sorrows mirror my own. At times, these sounds provide company for me in a world that is so silent and cruel. The crimes of its current master scream louder than any dead man looking for redemption. In the daytime, Padre is the center of the community in Cartago, and on Sunday he preaches the message of a vengeful God. When enraptured on the pulpit, the spittle from his mouth has often reached into the front pews, covering his parishioners like holy benediction. I can see, even with my one eye, that the Spanish people respect and fear him. He wears the brilliant robes I wash by hand and lay out in the sun to maintain their whiteness. If there is a stain from the wine when he performs Mass and I cannot get it out completely, he beats me. After service, there is always a Cartago family who will invite Padre to their home for dinner. Usually it is during this time that I am most afraid. He will return to the church full of wine and talk, and when the night has turned down, he will come to me. Like a dog, he sniffs and grabs me with an unexplainable force. He is a holy man of their church, and yet he climbs on me with a violent urgency that forces my spirit to sit at the hollow of my throat, deciding if it should finally escape this body called woman. This has been happening most Sundays for a year now, and I want to rest. He never looks at me as he removes himself from my body. He always takes me from behind, and though I used to hide in the corners, he forever captures me with such rage that now I just sit at the door, expecting.
Wow. Thank you for reading that section. I was going to start off with Esmeralda as my first questions for you. That's a very powerful passage you have there. And Esmeralda, you're talking about 4 characters in this book, and Esmeralda is the one character who talks in first person.
Yes.
And as you were reading, there's a whole bunch of poetry, there's a whole bunch of visual language, but the line that has no poetry in it at all, but might be the most important part, might be, I am a slave of the church. All right. And you are our Dr. Natasha. You've studied the history of this. So give the audience some background. Like I think we all know in passing how involved the Catholic Church was in slavery, but specifically you've done the research about what slavery was like in for the Catholic direct involvement in it in Costa Rica. So set up for the audience, you know what I'm saying, the circumstances Esmeralda would have existed in.
Yes, thank you. And it's really interesting. Yes, there are four main characters. And originally, when I wrote the book, they were all written from the I point of view. So they were all first person. And the only major editorial change in the entire book that I gave to my editor and to the press was this moment to decide who was going to be essentially the narrator, the I voice, and then out of the four, and then who would then be in third person. And there was no question for me that it needed to be Esmeralda, who was inherited to the Catholic Church. So that's one of the things that I talk about here in Costa Rica, because that's where I'm zooming in from. And just in conversations in general, that people don't understand how complicit the Catholic Church was in not only the transatlantic slave trade in terms of financing voyages and providing insurance, but also they maintained a large number of enslaved people. And there was sort of like a heritage or legacy system where wealthy Spaniards in their wills would essentially not manumit their slaves, but they would essentially gift their enslaved people to the Catholic Church as a way to sort of absolve them of whatever sin that they felt, perhaps they had to engage with at the end of their lives. And so the Catholic Church owned many enslaved people. And this comes up again, there's an auction later in the book where, the priest is like talking to other people and they're like, oh, are you going to buy, a couple of enslaved people? And it's like, oh, not this time. But, certainly, the option is always there because one, the church had ready finances, but they also had a community of people who understood that they could bequeath as gifts these enslaved people. And so that's the system that I wanted to show that is historically accurate, right? In terms of Esmeralda, who, she is passed literally from one owner to another. And I wanted to make clear that the spiritual understanding of the Catholic Church and how people perceive it has very little to do with sort of the capitalistic, exploitative, manipulative renderings of an institution, because essentially it's an institution, right?
Yep.
And so I think what happens is there's sort of this smokescreen in terms of the spirituality can absolve capitalism, which is sort of the in terms of my understanding, very much the impetus for the buying and selling of human beings, right? So that's the drive. That's the system that essentially emerges during the transatlantic slave period. And the Catholic Church was absolutely, involved and complicit.
Involved is not even a strong enough word.
Right. They were a major driver, and certainly they have reaped the benefits and continue to reap the benefits of what enslaved labor has done in terms of building the global North.
So, and I'm glad, like I'm a poet, and I feel like poetry happens in my life. The way books get dropped into on me, and different moments get dropped into on me. And I believe this book and this whole concept came at a really interesting time because I'm exploring, basically like the Black Shadow Church that has lived in North and South America this whole time. My children participate in capoeira. If you know anything about that Latin American art form, they sing songs to Catholic deities and saints, but it's all covering up an African spirituality. I've been understanding more about how like Yoruba is involved in like Cuban religion, and even though it represents itself as Catholicism, I do a lot of work around Frederick Douglass, and I had a chance to tour the house where he was enslaved. The tour was given by the great granddaughter of the woman who owned him, and she told me that archaeologists had just dug up where the slave quarters were and informed the family that the slaves there had been practicing an African spirituality there for hundreds of years. And this is the first time they had heard about it like 10 years ago. And it makes me realize just how much there is a shadow church going on. You know what I'm saying? Like Africans, and even more, even like, so this is La Negrita, the Black Madonna. I'm sorry if I didn't set this up correctly. I'm really excited about getting into this conversation. But basically with a Black Madonna, what you're doing is Black iconography, religious iconography was taken by Europeans and then reappropriated back into its Africanness by actual Africans and you in this story. So can you give us more, are there more examples of ways of how like Costa Ricans have Africanized their Catholicism? Like how much is that happening with that?
Right. Let me address this concept of the shadow church. I think it's a really interesting concept first. So I don't actually believe in a shadow church.
Okay.
I actually believe that people of African descent have never been in the shadows. We have been practicing our African spirituality right up front. You know, whether that means that, you know, you're on the street, you see somebody in all white, you know, they're going through their year of white. You understand that somebody might just have some beads, you know, there may be some candles. Our rituals, no matter what, I think are genetically and spiritually passed down. And so perhaps in the syncretic like use of Catholic, the saints, right? You basically have those performances, but the regla de ocha, condomble, all of these religions, they are not shadow religions. They are absolute clear retentions, manifestations, and the ancestral presence of people who have not forgotten and create legacy. And even as your children sing those songs, they are essentially, they are embodied prayers, you know, to remember. And so I think that even now, I think that there is a very large movement, and I would say in the global north, of Afro-descended people who are basically moving away from what you would understand as sort of your traditional, even traditional Black church, right? In the southern parts of the United States, where they are looking for other systems that are a little bit more inclusive, that are more fluid, that allow women to sort of be to minister in ways that historically they have always ministered, right? With using the ground, using their gardens, using whatever they need to. So I think that you have these African derived religions that have been, they have been transformed in many ways to hold in the contemporary experience, right? So our oppression, the movement, migrations, all those things. But I think that African religions, no matter what, they are not static. So there are some things that may be certain rituals and songs and practices that may have been passed down, but I think it's always energetic. And I think that it always has the room to expand and hold newness and hold modernity. And I think that that is very different than from your 1 hour Catholic mass sing in Latin, where, you know, from beginning to end, you getting in the door at 12, you getting out the door at 1, and that's pretty much what's happening. But going back to your question in terms of Costa Rica, I can't answer that contemporarily, but I can say that what happened with the story of the Black Madonna, maybe I can just give a little context to that. So the Black Madonna, La Negrita, the little black one, is essentially an icon, a Black stone icon of the Virgin Mary and Child that was found in 1634 by a free Black woman in colonial Costa Rica. And the narrative or the folklore goes that she found the icon 3 times, and each time she found it, she took it home and it disappeared. And on the 3rd time, she went to the local Catholic priest, and he was just like, basically, we need to build a church. So a church was constructed in the forest, in the space that she was found, in that original space, in the forest of Cartago. Now, one of the things that was interesting is that according to church documents, archives, and folklore that I've gathered through my research, because this project took me 7 years, the Catholic Church felt that the people who would be most interested in venerating a Black Madonna would be the free Black community. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand. And that's why I write about it. In the United States, we sort of think of slavery, we think of extensive, cotton plantations, single monocrop systems where you had hundreds of people laboring all day. And Costa Rica didn't have that. So Costa Rica didn't have a cash crop. It had slavery for over 200 years, but it had enslaved people. But the Spaniards that were here were never wealthy. because they couldn't compete economically, they were sort of forgotten. And what ends
Not
up
enough land
happening,
to steal.
exactly. And so what ends up happening is that they have no choice but essentially to, one, allow their enslaved person to work and buy their own freedom. That's what happens. Two, or they end up manumitting them. And three, if they can't afford them, then they just give them to the Catholic Church, right? But so what happens in Costa Rica, which is incredibly unique, is that there was a full community or full township of free Black people, right, who worked and had their own lives and were compensated by the Spaniards and other free Blacks and other people who moved around in this colonial time period. And most people don't understand. I mean, I think that if anything was comparable, obviously it would be a maroon situation, but that is more of a high. These people that were not maroons. They actually had their own town. They actually interacted. They were part of marketplaces. They were part of the commerce, and they understood there was a curfew. Right. So they understood their place and space, but in many cases, they could create their own lives as free Black people. So the Catholic Church in 1635 decided that this Madonna, Black Madonna, was to be venerated and by this free Black community because they felt like the Blacks would be the one who would be interested in her.
Right.
And so that's what they do. They literally create a brotherhood of free Black men to run the church, to run her veneration. And that happens for 200 years. So this Black community venerated this Black Madonna for 200 years in their community until Costa Rica gained its independence in 1821. And so what they needed to do was find some sort of national symbol to draw the country together. And so what they did was they took this Black Madonna, they whitened her, made her La Virgen de los Ángeles, so the Virgin of the Angels, created this massive basilica or cathedral, and then put her in there and essentially removed her from the African veneration. And what's interesting, and I remember coming across this in the archives, the Catholic Church always had issues with the way this Black community venerated her because their rituals and practices were all African based, from their dancing to their songs to their drums. And they had a lot of issues, but they felt that it was still something that could be sort of left in the Black community, that could be contained because the numbers were not massive, right? But then when they needed her, they took her out of that community and essentially removed her from the 200 years of African veneration that had already happened.
Such a colonizer thing to do, right? To use this icon that initially was African anyway, to help maybe placate the African population, and then when they need it, they reclaim it and act like it was never ours. Exactly. So I wanted to bring up I'm glad you mentioned that about the shadow church, and that is like, if you take any moment, I'm a PK. If you take any moment and you look at what people are doing religiously, on the surface level, you can see the Africanness of it. If you know anything about African culture, and you're right, it's happening right there at the top. The other reason I thought about using the shadow church as it is because the way the novel plays out, her shack is the real confessional. And at first I was like, "Oh, I'm clever because I figured that out." I was like, "No, she's clever because she knew what she was doing." You know what I'm saying? Like, where all the moments in the story where you find out, like, oh my goodness, it all happens with and the shack being the confessional makes Esmeralda the priestess. And I thought that was a really powerful setup, the way everyone kept coming back to her to tell them their secrets because they trust her and honor her. And so I want you to, to expand on that, like how the role that these slaves who were enslaved by the church and definitely would have had that connection with the Catholic Church that garnered them some respect in their own communities, like how that worked out in this novel.
Right. Well, so what happens is, and the part that I didn't continue reading is that, and this is right up front, so this is not a spoiler, anybody.
Got you. Yep, I'm afraid of those.
The first time that Esmeralda gets attacked, right, gets sexually assaulted by the priest, she doesn't expect it, so she fights him and she takes a candle to try to get him off of her, and that's essentially what happens. She fights him, her body burns, right, and so her arm gets deformed, like badly burned, and she loses an eye because her clothes basically burn on her body. She is able to escape and take herself to this Black community, and it's in the Black community that they help her heal. through aloe and other treatments. And that's the moment where, as an enslaved person, she then takes on agency. And that's one of the things I wanted. Esmeralda, for me, right? So visually, she's this older woman. She is blind in one eye. She has only one working arm. And she is an enslaved person, but she is really the most powerful person in the text because she's able to traverse multiple spaces, right? And so, so beyond priestess, she is basically maroon in the movement. She's a liberatory factor because she has the ability to read and write. She learns eventually how to read and write, and that's essentially the ticket that she uses, and that's why she becomes such an important elder in this free Black community because she's able to read whatever's coming in to Padre and the Catholic Church, and she's hearing all these conversations. And because she can read the letters and everything that's happening, she's able to then warn the community in so many ways that help them to persevere, to hide, to do whatever they need to do in order to maintain their freedom. And so for me, Esmeralda, what people perceive, I guess, stereotypically as weakness, as somebody who is differently abled, for me, she is so powerfully able because she has the ability to see in multiple ways, right? And we're not just talking about the superficial vision of the eye, but seeing. She is a seer, and that is why everybody confesses, right? Because she has that ability in many ways. And I've heard other people make this connection. She is essentially the embodiment of the Black Madonna. She is the space of the petition where you petition to her. And not necessarily as a priest going to confessional, but as a mother, as a divine feminine.
And the divine feminine, oh my goodness, that is I should have just kept it going because it's just a cool transition. The other line that I wanted to get back to, because it transitions me into the next character, is her understanding. She says, I don't have freedom of my body. And this leads us into hearing about her first rape at the hands of this Catholic priest. And then as she keeps encountering this throughout this novel. And I'm brought to the next character I wanted to talk about, Michaela. Am I saying, is it Michaela or is it Michaela?
No, Michaela, you're right.
Michaela. And she also recognizes she doesn't have the bodily autonomy that you would want women to have. But she also has the privilege of basically being the pet of an enslaver. Once again, I do a lot of work around Frederick Douglass, and I know one of the reasons Frederick Douglass was able to be who he was is because he essentially was a pet. You know what I'm saying? He got all the treatment that you would, because of someone who was allowed in the house and be friends with a child and take care of a child. And so Michaela is always wary about her bodily autonomy, and it comes into danger later, but she's able to keep some of it because of her relationship with her owner. Can you break down some of this character for me and what inspired that and what you wanted to bring out by introducing this character?
That's interesting. Well, Michaela, for me, I'm more interested in Michaela as an enslaved woman as she becomes the lover of Dakari, who is a free man. So I am more interested in sort of their relationships and the risk around love and freedom and liberation and the sacrifices one makes around that for love. And so I was really interested in how Michaela and Dakari try to work through that relationship, particularly because he's a free Black man and she's an enslaved Black woman. And so the fact that she is owned by the wealthiest family in colonial Costa Rica, and she has, basically she's the pet of the daughter, Lucia. And, but she, what I wanted to do was sort of highlight the dynamics of the household, right? Okay. So yes, I mean, she may have access to certain things, but at the same time, she's being hit, she's being disrespected. She is, her mobility is not, she doesn't have freedom of mobility. She basically is at the whim of the people who own her. And so that was, Michaela's view was important because what it did was it took us into the interior of sort of the colonial space, because I absolutely had no intention of centering whiteness. Right. And so it was through her lens that we experience the whiteness that happens in the town, because obviously I'm building a worldview, so it has to be authentic. Right. But in many cases, it's always through a Black lens. It's never through, I'm not I'm not centering whiteness in the novel at all. That's not my priority. That's not my story. I'm interested in the story of Black lives. And so, but Michaela is really important because she has to learn how to navigate those spaces. But I'm way more interested in how she makes choices and takes risks around loving this Black man.
It's interesting because her interactions with Dakara, especially at the beginning, actually all of them have the same feeling that you get from Romeo and Juliet, as far as like a love that's not sanctioned, but it's not families. It's not, worried about mom and dad. It's worried about the owners of you and worrying about how society owns you and you can't just do what you want. You know what I'm saying? Their initial conversation, I'm trying to be careful about spoilers myself. Their initial conversation with her, just trying to have a conversation with him and then running back real quick. It's not because, daddy is going to have a problem with her talking to this man. It's because she's literally property. And for them to figure out how to make the relationship work, they have to navigate not only their love and their emotions and their feelings, but like the financial situation that is her life. And it's I feel so bad. Now I felt good reading the story. It ends well. But just being dropped into that situation where you realize that she doesn't have choice, that she doesn't have bodily autonomy. The fact that she hadn't been taken advantage of up until that point was almost luck rather than, you know what I'm saying, anything else. She just happened to be one of the fortunate slaves who was in a position whose owners would not allow that to happen to her.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because basically her owner is a widow, right? And in many cases, she doesn't interact so much with the man of the house, and so it's really a house of women. But I also wanted to not glorify what it meant to be in a house of women. That there were also incredibly violent spaces. I mean, there are many books that document, white women as owners of enslaved people and essentially what they did. So there's no escape in terms of sort of privileging white women and excusing them from the violence of slavery.
And to that point, someone reiterated to me the fact that one of the earliest slave laws in North America was against Virginia. Just dealing with the idea that Virginia slaveholding women evidently were notorious for just killing the light-skinned slaves around the house, and they had to do an ordinance to have something said about it because they weren't separate from the violence that were happening. They weren't innocent bystanders. They were completely a part of all the violence that was going on. So let's now get into Jindai. Am I saying her name correctly? Jindai. So, and this is just how it affected me. I think you did a really good job of going back and forth between their Spanish and their African names. It is very jarring to see Juan at one point and then Dakari at another point, and you realize the two worlds they live in. When I've read other reviews and seen the conversations that you've had around the book, it always strikes me that you call, it's completely true, but that you call Jindaye and Dakari free Black people, because the way it feels, it's not really like their freedom is so tenuous. I mean, to the point where Dakari tells his daughter, you don't be out in the street while there are slavers around because you don't know what will happen next. And so like no one in the story, I feel like none of the Africans in the story are completely free. It's all very tenuous. So tell us more about what inspired Jindai's character and what did you want the audience to get from understanding her story?
Right. That idea around freedom. So that's the central theme of the book, by the way. The idea that freedom during the colonial period, when there was enslavement, it was always tenuous and it was always fragile. And every single person, whether they were born free or they were actually enslaved, had to fight with that line, and it could change at any time. Right. And so that for me was really central to the entire book. But Jendai, what I wanted to do was think about a young woman as a coming of age story, right? Coming of age. She's born in the Middle Passage, right? So that she's in this in between space. And so her coming of age story is like, well, where do I belong? right? And so for me, in thinking, she's lost her mother, her father raises her, but her father only raises her after 7 years, because he is enslaved for the first 7 years, but he's able to basically pay for his own freedom from working extra, selling his labor. He's a skilled sculptor and carpenter. And so that is why he's able to essentially buy his freedom after 7 years of work. And they're reunited, but he also has difficulty because in many ways he's kind of frozen in time, thinking about the child that he left, who was a newborn, and then being away from her and reuniting with her at 7. So he doesn't have the language of trying to figure out a teenager, right? And so I wanted to also really think about family. I was really, really thinking about like father-daughter relationships, and not only from Dakarai's point of view in thinking about, okay, I need to provide, right? But I've been focused on my daughter, but I also need to see my daughter, I mean, the idea, I wanted to make that clear even from the beginning, right? Where, Jendai wakes up and she's in like this nightgown that's clearly too little for her. And she notices it, right? But I wanted to show, well, she's having this growing body, but the world around her is not acknowledging that, right? And she's very naive. She's very sheltered. And it's only through interactions with actually Esmeralda that she begins to unravel some of the backstory and then finally find some grounding for herself. And she can only find grounding for herself because she was always born free, right? She was never enslaved. So finding grounding for herself really has to do with making decisions. She's always just followed what everybody has told her to do. And so finally, when she begins to start making decisions, risky ones, though, that's when she begins to understand a little bit about herself. And that's what I wanted. I wanted, just a juxtaposition. I also wanted a multi-generational story, right? So you have Esmeralda, who was in her 50s and enslaved, and Dakarai, he's in his 30s or so. Jendai is 15, 16, and Michaela is, 20s, late 20s. And so I wanted sort of this multi-generation and multiple perspectives of what it would be like living in a colonial setting during enslavement in Costa Rica.
What is amazing and what you do a beautiful job of in this book, what baffles my mind is how do you continue to try to have a family when you're in slavery? Like, I know what it is. I know love and intimacy and just the sexual desire to be with a partner. I had an elder tell me one time that basically when you're horny, that spirit's calling you from the other side who want to come through. You know what I'm saying? And like, there's nothing that stops that, even when you are in such a dire situation as these slaves. And the fact that there are two like romantic stories happening in here under the worst type of circumstances. What did you learn about like love and relationships and children and family from your research about slavery in Costa Rica and how it continued to happen even though they were in these dire situations?
Right. Well, I have to say that the research on slavery in Costa Rica is minute. It is
a lot of work.
Like, that is why
you said in another interview, I did a lot of research. You were saying that like basically the whole country didn't admit to slavery until a couple decades ago, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not something that's part of the national curriculum. It's not a common discourse. A lot of people don't know that there were 200 years of slavery, and people sort of say, that was the past. How is that relevant today? And I was like, well, you see those nice big buildings and those roads? That's not the past. You were still riding on those roads that enslaved people's labor used and created. But I think that in terms of freedom and in terms of thinking about love and family, I was thinking about like, so what are the risks for love? And I have to say, I mean, openly say that I am in a very loving marriage. I mean, I've been with my partner for 26 years and we have 2 grown children and we have traveled extensively, and he is, he is not only my best friend, but my primary supporter. And so I did not conjure the love that I wrote into this text. The type of love that I wrote into this text is a love that I know and have known. And I am definitely embodied. So it's not pretend. It's like, I didn't pretend to write about Zimbabwe. I've been to Zimbabwe. I lived in South Africa. So, I mean, these are not like, there's not Afrofuturism in that sense, which I love. I love Afrofuturism, possibilities of the future, but it was definitely digging back into the past. And I was just like, absolutely. In our genetics, we just did not pass on suffering and oppression, in terms of what we had to experience. We passed on love, because if not, how would we get here? How would you and I be at this conversation right now if we did not have people who believed instinctively and in it, just genetically and spiritually, in love? And so I wanted love to traverse everything. So you had platonic love, you had, you had sex and intimacy, because that's part of everyday human development. And when those things are perverted, that particular pain stops growth, right? But when it's beautiful, the risks are irrelevant, because what it does to your spirit, it gives you hope. Right. And so that's one of the things I wanted to put into the text, that even when the decisions are hard, the greatest act of rebellion, resistance, and revolution is love.
It's amazing, because what ended up, we are the evidence of it. What ended up being the cure of this international slavery system is a generational thing. It took generations for it to happen. In order for generations to happen, you need to make love. You know what I'm saying? Like that is the key element. You know what I'm saying? If not, it stops with you, and then there's not someone else who has an opportunity to learn from what you did and be able to move it to the next part. It's actually a really beautiful, moving love stories. A couple of them that are happening in this story. So you did a wonderful job with
Thank
that.
you.
So then let's transition into this last character, Dakari.
Yes.
As I was reading it, and Lisa and I, your editor, we've had conversations about how writing is considered, especially until recently, such a masculine thing. And I worried that I was in my own head censoring Dakari when it was just a bias on my part. But it's not. Like, Dakari is like the thread right through everything. But I realized what is great about him. He is an incredibly good man. He is an incredibly good man. And the reason that he's a good man is that he is the man that all these women need. He is the son to Esmeralda. He is the lover to Michaela. He is the father to Jendai. And he does all of them exceptionally well, especially considering the circumstances that he lives in. What do you think empowers him to be such a good man? Why? I want to say, I think I'm a good man. I'm pretty positive I'm a pretty good man. Part of me reading this story was like, if I was him in this situation, a free Black man in a free Black town, who was doing well, who was even admired by the enslavers, like, it would take a lot of moral fortitude for me not to have like 20 mini-me's running around. Cause I know every, you know what I'm saying? Like, as far as free Black men go, he had to have been the top of the hill. So like, what do you think, as the person who this character came through, what empowered him and made him be such a good man?
Good question. So, a couple of things, I think. Well, Dakari came to me first as the character. He showed up and I was like, oh, okay, so what's your story? And he just guided me through writing of this book. And so I wrote probably, I don't know, maybe 20 pages originally, that I actually workshop, because I run an annual writing retreat in Costa Rica. So the first time I ever shared, because I had never written fiction before. This is my first fiction book. I've written academically, obviously, for a long time, but this is my first fiction book. And so I workshopped around 20 pages, and it was around Dakari, right? That was sort of, I was trying to get him and figure him out. And I remember taking these 20 pages to my husband, and I was just like, what do you think? And I was like so nervous, because like my husband's word means a lot to me. It means everything to me, because I know everybody will blow smoke, but he will actually be honest, and I can learn from him, and I can actually, and I did. And he was kind of like, well, the man that you have here is sort of a woman's fantasy of like, and I was just like, he's like, men are more complex than that, and men are, are flawed. And I just thought, okay. So I was like, okay, Dakari, what you doing? And so the story that he asked me to write, Dakara, essentially, was very complicated. But there was something about him that, in many ways, I think, mirror the goodness, the inherent goodness that is reflected from my husband, from my son. They're really good people. And I can name 10 or 15 other Black men who are equally as beautiful, as grounded, and equally as flawed. That is the beauty. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking at the journey and how compassionate you can be to not only others, but to yourself, right? And so the way that Dakara shows up, in many ways, he is not a figment of my imagination in terms of his character building. He's really an embodiment of how I've engaged with Black men who I love because they have loved me so beautifully.
I love that, and I don't know how many. Like I said, I'm just being reintroduced into fiction, and this historical fiction like really hit the spot for me. And I don't, but I really appreciated his character because, like I said, I think I'm a good guy, and I really appreciated that about him. I was trying to figure out something about like the spiritual metaphors that are going on here. This is a story, a retelling of the Madonna story, and so I was wondering who the Holy Trinity is. I'm pretty sure Esmeralda is the Holy Spirit. Which I'm trying to figure out what Michaela and Jendai are the other two members, and I'm okay with 3 women being in the Holy Trinity because the Catholicism is missing a woman in the Holy Trinity completely. But I recognized quickly that Dakari is not in the Holy Trinity. He's the Joseph of this story. Joseph is, like, to me, the most redeemable character in the entire Bible. He's the one who understands that community and family and children are more important than his own direct bloodline. And it plays out in the Bible, and I don't think people talk about that enough. What do you think that the idea that Dakari was such a good father, considering, you didn't read in other interviews, like I said, I've done backstory, you read the intro, so we understand a little bit more about his relationship with his daughter. Why do you think that Dakari was able to put aside what usually is like, I gotta let my bloodline be the thing that survives, and instead be good for the community as a whole? Does that make sense as a question? Yeah.
So without spoilers,
yes,
because everybody needs, all right. So that's a little bit of a hard question. So Dakari is able, because of his experience of being captured, right? So he has a whole African story, right? And so and he's very famous, he's quite respected, he is the sculptor. And so the fact that he, as an artisan, gets then taken through the Middle Passage and then sold and ends up in Costa Rica. By the time Jendai is there, who is the remnant of her mother, that's the last, she's the living evidence of her mother's life. There is no question for him that he will not raise her, and that is his daughter, and he is obligated to her, particularly because there is no returning home. This is what they have, right? So it is about, they talk about, during the Middle Passage, right? So new African families are created in the Middle Passage because essentially people forge communities and friend networks and kin networks across, because everybody's mixed up, right? And so you may not speak the same language, but essentially
y'all in the same tribe now.
Exactly. Yeah. And so absolute new families are created, and people go forward into this new space and try to survive together. And I think in many cases that is Dakari's. There's no question for him that this is his daughter, and he's raising her, and he's going to do the best he can. And because he was that person in Africa, he essentially had community. He had his parents. He had a whole life. It's not like he was born like Jendai, who was born during the on the Atlantic Ocean, right? Where he does have a memory. And Petronella, who is his neighbor, is someone who was also from that time period and from his home. And so she serves as a witness, as a constant reminder. She speaks his language about that time before, I mean, so it's really, really important that he manifests the the practices and the rituals of family and community that he was born with. And I think that many people who survived the Middle Passage and were enslaved in the global North are essentially, and in the New World, in the Atlantic world, essentially they did the same things. They maintained those rituals and created kinship ties in order to survive.
It's interesting because the driving force behind the Bible, when you go back and look at it, is the maintenance of a particular bloodline. Not people as a whole, not we're all God's children, but literally the maintenance of a particular bloodline. And I think sometimes that becomes the problem. I know for a fact that becomes our problem in society now, because you're like, I'm literally looking out for my family instead of understanding that we're all from the same original source. And Dakari seem to have understand that, both, like you said, from where he came from and then understanding where they are. They're all basically in the same place. And I was really impressed with him. So I want to do this. There are 3 questions that I like to ask my guests. I have a morning program that I do called The Morning Announcements, and I have another program that I do called Educators and Artists Talk, called Eat. I'm actually going to use some of these clips, hopefully, as part of that program. But when I do that, my motto for my show is honor the ancestors, prepare the descendants, and love right now. And so I've asked you to give me examples of how you honor the ancestors. Is there an ancestor, someone who helped you get to the point that you are right now, that you would like to shed light on and call their name and let people know what they've done for you?
Oh, yes. Well, right inside the book, actually, the book is inscribed to, I don't know if you guys can see that, to my Tia Madge, Tia Marjorie. And I lost my Tia Marjorie 3 years ago. It's my mother's, one of my mother's 3 sisters, and I lost her 4 years ago, actually, September. Oh, wow. And that was devastating. That was absolutely devastating. She has always been my spiritual guide. She has been the person, when you have a dream, you call Tia, and Tia will be like, okay, let me tell you what to do, and there was no contradiction between her telling me what to do and interpreting the dream for me. And at the same time, with her going every Sunday to Catholic church. So there was no disruption in terms of her understanding of spirituality. And I have to say that she has, as an ancestor, she has been incredible. Like the way she's like Oya with the wind. I mean, she is just moving everything for me. So I dedicated the book for her. And I said, basically, because you cleared the way. And that's really what I asked for. When I started this project, I asked La Negrita, I went to the Basilica. I asked her, if you want me to write the story, then I need you to open the doors for me. And which included literally moving my family to Costa Rica. I've been here for 9 years, right? So it meant leaving New York. It meant, making massive sacrifices, but also raising our Black children in a space that's much more conducive to their safety, where their bodies are not criminalized. No place is perfect, but certainly they have had a childhood, right? Which we know is very elusive, particularly for Black children in the United States. So I would say my Aunt Marjorie for this book, and then my great-grandmother, Ruth Grant Young, who came to Costa Rica from Jamaica in 1908. And so I'm her 4th generation. And she came to the Caribbean coast of Puerto Limon. So I am I've done about 1.5 years of research already. I'm starting my next book, historical fiction book called Naomi, which is a very loose rewriting of my great-grandmother's story in coming to Costa Rica.
I'm excited. I'm going to read that one too when it comes out. I love the fact that you're honoring your ancestors and telling it through these stories, which is great. I'm amazed by that. So we have honor the ancestors, then we have prepare the descendants. You are a professor in history.
And I know I teach writing and
writing.
literature.
I got you, but you just do a lot of. So the other thing that I know you from online was the Sarah Bartman stuff that you've done.
Yes.
So as a writing teacher, I'm a writing teacher as well. I teach creative writing through hip hop. What advice could you give to parents, educators, people who are trying to get young writers involved in writing? If you can give them a little snippet, you don't have to give them the thing, your big money tip, but what can you give us a tip so that we can better prepare the descendants?
Oh, I wish I could find a money tip. I don't have a money tip. I just, that's a good idea. Two simple things. And I gave a talk to about 250 students yesterday in Costa Rica around my book.
Okay.
And basically, I'd like to say the same thing. Well, one, read everything. And that is specifically in the face of this whole banned book thing. I do not advocate and do not believe in banning books. I believe all books should be read and then discussed. There should be platforms for conversation. Everything can be understood in every book. Everything can be understood in context. And so, as you said, you thought that I was a historian. In many cases, I'm formally trained to do research and writing, but I teach literature. But I always teach literature in context. There's never going to be a time where I'm just reading, and I can do pleasure reading, but if I am teaching, it has to be, okay, well, if this is happening, what's happening in the world around it? Like, what are some of the decisions that the world is making that this book would then, interrogate or think about or question? And so I always teach a historical, social, cultural context, political context to any text that I'm teaching, so that the students understand a whole worldview around it. And so read. There's no way that you can write if you don't read.
Okay.
Absolutely, there's no way. And then if you are inspired to write, you have to get it on the page. That's what people don't understand. They're like, well, I have a writer's block. Just get it on the page, whatever it is. Just put it down. You can handwrite it. You can type it, get it on the page, because once it's on the page, it can then live. And really good writing only happens when revision happens. That's it, right? But you can't revise anything on a blank page. And so that's it.
Yep.
So read consistently all the time, and absolutely get it on the page, right?
I love that. That's the advice I give my students all the time. To mind map, to write. I don't let my students, I have them do a mind map, and I don't let them use pencil. I only let them use pen, because I want all their ideas to be stuck on the paper, even the bad ideas. You come up with good ideas by having the quote unquote bad idea on the paper and revising it. So you got to, encourage the students to do that all the time. I'm especially excited about your message because I am officially nationally known as Mr. Read a Book. I have backed away from it some because honestly, me being Mr. Read a Book was supposed to be a level of sarcasm, because reading a book is supposed to be like, the importance of reading is supposed to be such a non-arguable fact that I felt like it should be more sarcastic than real. But we are in a time period where it's a literal, like, you're not allowed to know about these stories. They're editing the story of Rosa Parks to the point where you don't know why she was just an angry old woman on the bus. You know what I'm saying? Instead of someone who worked for years,
radically trained, right?
Yeah, she trained.
Right.
She was ready for that moment. She put herself in that. She saw a young sister do it one time, and she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna do it with like an army behind me." So yeah. And you have to read that story so you know that that's how it happened. So yes, very, very good answer to that question. The third thing is, so we got honor the descendants. Honor the ancestors, prepare the descendants, and love right now. In your art form, as a teacher, as a writer, as a historical fiction writer, who could you put us on to that we need to know about? Who should we love right now that's making it happen? And you got me back into reading this genre, so I'm taking notes because I'm gonna go look them up.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So Vanessa Riley is someone who I really love, and her book called Island Queen is a book that I really love. It's historical fiction, and she just has a new one out called Queen of Exiles. And she's writing about a Haitian queen, and it's all historical fiction, so it's very well researched. And I love what she does with gathering how she incorporates historical fact with, creating the life and the possibilities of her central character. So I would say Vanessa Riley. The person that a couple of people, since you asked me this question. So the person who really inspired, I mean, I'm a literature person, so we could talk for hours. Yep. So I would say the two people who have inspired me, even in terms of writing, finding La Negrita, is Saidiya Hartman, who is a professor historian, and she is a professor at Columbia University. She wrote...
Say her name again, I'm sorry.
Saidiya Hartman.
Okay.
And she wrote Lose Your Mother. Lose Your Mother is probably one of the most important texts I've ever read. So she's an African American who actually goes back to Ghana and starts to retrace the slave route. Mm-hmm. And it's nonfiction, right? Okay. So it's history, but it is incredibly important because what it does is it shifts the lens in how people think about the transatlantic slave moment, right? Gotcha. And the implications of it, and the way she understands what it was almost like the factory process of, taking African people and then in the process of capturing and storing them and then putting them on these ships. And it's a factory process of turning them into the final product, which is an enslaved person. Because people were not born slaves, you become enslaved through a process that other people put on you, right? I mean, you are born with your liberty. Mm-hmm. You are born with your freedom. And so it is only other people who essentially can take that away from you, even if you resist the whole time. So I would say Vanessa Riley for historical fiction. I would say for nonfiction, Saidiya Hartman. And then historical fiction, and you should read everything that she's ever written in general, is Edwidge Dandicat. Like The Farming of Bones definitely was an inspiration for me. She writes, I think it's the first actual historical fiction rendering of the 1937 massacre, the Parsley Massacre of, estimated 15,000 Haitian sugarcane workers in the Dominican Republic in October 1937 under the Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo. And so she actually writes about the massacre. And it's the first time that I've actually seen historical fiction do that. And it has inspired me ever since. So anything that Edwidge Dandicat is writing, read it. And she has essays, she just has everything. So I would say those are some of the people that really inspire me. And the last book, the one that I'm actually reading right now, is Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hershey.
Tricia Hershey.
Okay. And she is called the Nap Bishop. Okay. And she has a whole movement that talks about as Afro-descended people around the world that we actually need to pause and rest. And we're not just talking and like literally nap. Yes, as a way to specifically, politically, consciously resist capitalism. That is what she's saying. She was like, our ancestors labored almost 20 hours a day. They had no rest. And so we are deserving of resting because they've already done the work. And so why is it, we are literally machines in grind culture replicating the labor that was stolen from our ancestors. And so she was just like, we just need to go
to Lords of London and give us the money that we've already worked for. Our ancestors already worked for. We should be
absolutely. But really she also says that in the space of rest, we actually are then able to dream. And once we can dream, a couple of things happen. One, we become in tune with whatever ancestral message we need to get. And two, in dreaming, that is when we have vision to create new community and go forward differently.
Word. You need some time to imagine it. Shoot, the whole way art happens anyways, when the community has created enough food and shelter for some people to be able to use their mind and their energy to be able to imagine another world and imagine the next world. So very important. I'm looking at the comments on YouTube. My good friend Tony Blackman is taking meticulous notes of all the things that we should read. I've been waiting till I get my infrastructure a little bit more together, and I'm gonna bring her on the show as well.
Yes, Tony's a longtime friend. I love that sister.
That's what's up. That's what's up. Now, I am so excited about this opportunity. Thank you very much. I want to get into, I got a statement, then I want to ask you another question just about being an expatriate. But I know Lisa, your editor, and I know for a fact how she thinks. And I know that she knows that I've always imagined writing a historical fiction thing that I haven't finished. And she also wanted me to talk to you to put that battery in my back.
I love it.
To make sure I get on the historical fiction that I'm supposed to write. And I really appreciate that, because I definitely need it. There's stories from where my family's from in South Carolina that need to be told, that have all the archival stuff together, but just need to be told in real voices instead of as just wrote historical dates and times, you know what I'm saying, pull people into the story. So we don't have a lot of time left. I want to give Michaela an opportunity to do the closing announcements and make sure people know more about Sankofa video and books. But the part of your story, the reason you wrote about Costa Rica, or it all works together, is that you are now in Costa Rica. Yes. And that I've seen in other interviews, you talked about knowing, and I knew this too, because I'm also a student of history, you knew about the Obama backlash. I knew about the Obama backlash. I didn't think it was going to be immediate. I didn't think it was going to be like the very next president and the very next, you know what I'm saying, everything CRT, I'm sure like the right wingers who were like, the reason we have a black president is because we let too many black people be in our children's heads while they were being raised. And so we need to eliminate those black people from in front of their faces. That's how we allowed Obama to happen. Right. And so you talk about finding that window of leaving America. I'm in Prince George's County, so I feel relatively safe, but it's not Costa Rica or Ghana. Right. So tell people about, your inspiration, why you are now. Are you Costa Rican? Are you still American, or?
Yes, I'm actually going to become, my mother's Costa Rican. As I said, I'm fourth generation Costa Rican. My father's from Panama, but I was born in the States. I'm a U.S. citizen.
So you're a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, a U.S. citizen. Yes. And I'm going to actually, by the end of this year, I should have dual citizenship, where I, have both Costa Rican and my U.S. passport. I'm not giving up my U.S. Because my family's there, right? And so that's the whole point, right?
The U.S. owes us anyway. We don't have to give them anything back.
Right. So many people that I love are still in the U.S. And so I move back and forth, and my parents are older, my siblings are there. And so certainly I move back and forth. But my husband and I knew, we sort of took the temperature. We were like, okay, Obama is sweet for, sweet in terms of aesthetics, right?
Yes.
Obviously,
you can show him to your children and be like, we can do anything.
Right. And so in terms of visual aesthetics and message, in terms of breaking a particular glass ceiling, in terms of looking at a Black family, all these visual options were very affirming. That has nothing to do with his political track record and sort of the things that happened under his watch, and particularly in Africa, that we need to be critical of, right? Because nobody's perfect. He's a politician. Right. However, in looking at history and thinking about Reconstruction particularly, right?
I know
we my husband and I, we're very much read in history. And not only, we met in South Africa. So imagine we met when Nelson Mandela was president, and so we had a whole other understanding of how a nation was trying to reinform itself after sort of a period of whiteness, right? And what was going to happen then. And Mandela was the first Black president at that time, just like, Obama was the first Black president. So there were so many different parallels that we had already experienced. And so we were like, you know what, an opportunity came, and it was kind of like, we know what's coming. We didn't know about COVID. Like COVID, it just was a left hook, right? Definitely to the gut. It was just, but in terms of what politically the backlash of Black excellence, we've lived it our whole lives. And so it was like, yeah, maybe. And our son was just going to go into eighth grade. So he was just at that age
Middle
where the
school is where
cops,
you got to have it
exactly.
under control.
But he played baseball, so he would be running and people would stop him, and I remember we were in DC once and on like spring break or whatever, and this older Black man stopped our son and said, you can't run in public. And he was like, what are you talking about? And it was just like, and then so we had to have the conversation with him about, okay, your body is now being criminalized. If you're running, they're thinking you stole somebody's purse, right? And whether you fit a description or not, it does not matter. You know what I'm saying? There's scapegoating that happens, and we have to make some radical intervention, right now about how we're going to ensure your childhood so that you can survive. Because right now the system is consuming particularly Black boys, and that has not changed, right? And so we had the opportunity because my family's here, and yeah, and we moved, we bought one-way tickets, and we were very clear that, we said that we were going to try it for a year, right? Like we didn't run. We were not running. This is not like, it was not, and it's a privilege. Absolutely understand it's privilege.
Only our generation is able to make these. I'm doing a lot of research on like all Black movements have been a response to something instead of being like, let me consciously make a decision. Yes. But our grandparents and our parents have set us up to the point where we can be like, let me plan ahead and make this move instead of responding to the forces.
Exactly. And my son, we had a conversation recently. He's 22. He's graduating from college. He goes to college in Canada. And we were talking about graduate schools. And he was just like, okay, so in the move, like how much money did what was the process like in terms of moving? Because it just sort of happened, and we had this house, and we had this new life. We went to school and we got bikes. But he was kind of like, that's different at eighth grade, like 12, 13. And then all of a sudden at 22, like, Mom, how did you do that? And it was kind of like your dad and I made a plan. We sat down, some of it was just the grace of God, certainly. And our ancestors going, we getting you through this door, y'all gonna have to land on the other side. And we landed in a way that was very graceful. And I give thanks every day that we have the opportunity to be here. Does it mean that Costa Rica is perfect? Absolutely not. Does it mean that there are no issues around racism and discrimination here? Absolutely not. However, I am not criminalized in my body. People will take me as a human first in the interaction, even if they don't know something, or even if my presence makes them uncomfortable, they are willing. I know that even in uncomfortable situations, no one's going to pull out a gun, or no one's going to try to put a knee on my neck. It's not going to be that way. I will be dealt with in my full humanity. And that's important.
I'm still hurt that your son was in this day and age. Like, I completely know the rule about Black men running and that being scary to everyone. It must. But he's the Black man who stopped him was not wrong. You know what I'm saying? It is a situation that we live in. I'm really excited that you were able to find a safe space for your family. I'm really excited that you were able to tell this story about Costa Rica. We are running short on time, so give everybody your information, how to get in contact with you, and anything else you want to tell them about the book. But y'all, if you're gonna read a book, you need to read Finding La Negrita. Dr. Natasha, tell them more about your book and how to get in contact with you.
Yes, thank you. So please, everybody, just follow me on Instagram. It's my name. I know I have a 10-pound name, but Natasha Gordon-Chipembere on IG. I would love to, have folks on there. And I do book giveaways. I do a bunch of other stuff. And, my website also about my writing retreats and everything else. It's my name, NatashaGordonChipembere.com. That's pretty much how you can get in touch with me.
Like I said, I've been doing research, so I know that you've got a waiting list to get onto your
Sorry.
No problem. No, that's a good problem to have, right?
Yes.
I've got a 6-month-old. Once he's a little bit older, and now that I got the battery back in my back about my historical fiction, I might be hitting you up about retreating and getting that done. So thank you very much. Let me also let you know that Watermelon Day, we are 90 days. Let me see to give you the exact countdown. We are now 90 days, 21 and a half hours away from Watermelon Day 2023. Make sure you get it. I'll make sure you Sankofa gets the link to where you can get them. Our Watermelon Day shirts provided by the Terrell family. They did a wonderful job with the artwork. You had mentioned the snapback after Reconstruction. One of the reasons that there was a negative stereotype about Black people in watermelon was them being so proud. Like white farmers have told me that you don't find heirloom watermelons dated anytime before 1863, 1865, 1866, because we were working on it so hard and we're so proud of it and would have whole festivals around it. And part of that snapback, that we're mad at you for being free, was our oppressors turning it into a negative stereotype. And so I want to make sure that we turn it right back and be like, we love the fact that we put our hands in the ground. We love the fact that we do red, black, and green, that we educate and take care of ourselves. Thank y'all very much for joining us here at Sankofa. Once again, Sankofa Video and Books, the Pan-African Embassy. I'm going to hand it back over to Michaela. You can find me at notarapper.com. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that so much. Thank you both for being here, Dr. Natasha Gordon-Chipembere and Bomani Armah. This has been Kicking Against Holy, oh my God, what's the last word? Houses?
Yes.
There we go. For Finding La Negrita, it's available online and in the bookstore. If you enjoy having events like this, please go to our website and look at what we have coming up next. We have so many events coming up, like almost every day. Also, if you want to rewatch this live, it'll be available on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Facebook. Okay, so share it with a friend. This has been an invigorating conversation. I learned so much, and we really appreciate having you both here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
this,
you.
This is a bookshelf in Sankofa. There's a
Right.
whole bunch of stuff back here you need to read.
That's a good point. You know, I saw his background. I was like, wait, that looks familiar. Is that really our books? It really is our bookstore. So, I mean, that's amazing. Thank you for the shout out.
No
but I
problem.
won't hold you guys any longer. Have a great day, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Take
Peace.
care.